she posted one final message on Facebook on the night she died. 7 words: raw, unfiltered, explosive. I've never hated someone as much as I hate someone now. Less than an hour later, Lucy Landry was fighting for her life in the darkness of a cold English country lane, just outside the mansion that was supposed to be her fairy tale. She had been struck in the head with a granite rolling pin. She had been stabbed 23 times. She screamed loudly enough for neighbors to hear her across the estate. She ran from her own home. She pounded on windows, begging for someone to let her in. Every terrifying second of that desperate fight for survival unfolded while her 2 children slept inside the house, completely unaware that their mother's life was slipping away just outside their bedroom walls. This is the story of Harold Landry, a self-made millionaire from the bayous of Louisiana, a man who built an empire through determination, ambition, and hard work, a man who reinvented himself as an English country gentleman after finding love across the Atlantic. But behind the wealth, behind the success, and behind the carefully crafted image was a darkness that would eventually destroy everything he claimed to love. This is also the story of Lucy Davies, a talented Welsh musician, a devoted mother, a woman who simply wanted her freedom back. And this is the story of what can happen when a man driven by pride, control, and the belief that he can never be wrong decides that if he can't have the person he loves, no one else will. Harold Landry grew up in Louisiana in a large Cajun working-class family with roughly a dozen brothers and sisters. There was no inherited fortune, no powerful family connections, no easy path to success. What Harold possessed instead was relentless ambition. He entered the offshore oil industry, designing cranes for oil platforms during a period when the industry was rapidly expanding. His determination paid off. Over the years, Harold transformed himself into a millionaire. By the time he established himself around Covington, Louisiana, he had become a respected businessman, a major employer, and a man known for his considerable wealth. On the surface, Harold appeared to embody the American dream. He had already been married twice and had 4 children in the United States. Friends described him as generous, sociable, and deeply proud of his family. But those who knew him best also recognized another side. His longtime friend and Louisiana attorney, Pat Fanning, described Harold as an angry man, a man who could be difficult to like. More importantly, he described Harold as someone who believed he was always right. And once Harold convinced himself he was right, changing his mind became almost impossible. That single personality trait would eventually become one of the defining elements of this entire case. By 1999, Harold was 53 years old. He had wealth. He had property. He had achieved almost everything he had spent his life working toward. But despite all of his success, he was lonely. Like many people entering a new digital era, Harold turned to the internet, exploring online chat rooms in search of companionship. His username was Kinjun H. Somewhere among thousands of anonymous conversations, he met a woman whose username was Misery. Her real name was Lucy Davies. She was 28 years old, a Welsh music student living in England, a single mother raising a young son from a previous relationship. Friends remembered Lucy as intelligent, warm, funny, and full of life. One neighbor would later describe her as having an almost encyclopedic knowledge of classical music. She loved music. She loved her children. She looked toward the future with optimism. There was one obvious difference between them. Harold was 25 years older than Lucy, but neither of them seemed to care. Their relationship moved quickly. Harold traveled to the United Kingdom, and according to those who knew them, the romance developed almost immediately. Before long, Lucy became pregnant. For Harold, who had already built one successful life in America, Lucy represented something entirely different. A second chance, a fresh beginning, an opportunity to reinvent himself. The couple married. Lucy and her son entered a life of financial security unlike anything they had experienced before. Then Harold made one of the most surprising decisions of his life. Instead of bringing Lucy back to Louisiana, he left America behind. He walked away from the business empire he had spent decades building. He left behind lifelong friends, familiar surroundings, and everything that had once defined him. He moved permanently to England. He wasn't simply changing countries. He was trying to become a completely different man, a Louisiana oil millionaire, reborn as an English country. At first, everything appeared almost perfect. In 2002, Harold's longtime Louisiana attorney and close friend, Pat Fanning, met the couple while they were vacationing in Mexico. He remembered Lucy as vibrant, intelligent, and effortlessly charming. Wherever they went, she seemed to be the center of attention. Harold, meanwhile, appeared completely devoted to her. He showered her with affection, expensive holidays, financial security, and every comfort money could provide. To everyone watching from the outside, they looked like a couple deeply in love. Soon, the family settled at the prestigious Besford Court estate near Pershore, Worcestershire. Their home was a large Cotswold-style house, surrounded by beautiful countryside. It was quiet, private, and exactly the kind of place many people dream of living. Not long afterward, their daughter Harriet was born. Lucy was raising both Harriet and her son James, while Harold embraced the image of a successful businessman enjoying a peaceful family life in rural England. From the outside, it looked like Harold had finally found everything he had ever wanted. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. Behind the closed doors of that beautiful home, something was beginning to change. Friends would later describe the marriage as becoming a volatile mix of anger, alcohol, and control. Arguments became more frequent. Then they became more intense. And eventually, they became frightening. Whenever Harold drank, friends said he became a completely different person. The friendly businessman disappeared. In his place was a man who demanded control, a man who hated being challenged, a man who refused to lose an argument. What no one in England knew was that this wasn't the first time Harold's temper had turned violent. To understand what would eventually happen to Lucy, investigators would have to travel 16 years into Harold's past. February 6, 1994. Louisiana. At the time, Harold was involved in a relationship with a married woman. Her husband, Chris Price, eventually confronted him at a traffic light. According to eyewitness testimony, the confrontation lasted only moments. Harold reached for a .38 caliber handgun. Witnesses later testified that he looked directly at Chris and said, "I'm going to shoot you." Then he pulled the trigger. The bullet struck Chris Price in the neck. He survived, but only narrowly. Harold was arrested and charged with attempted murder. His defense argued that he had acted in self-defense. Despite eyewitness accounts, the charge was eventually reduced to aggravated battery. In October 1994, Harold was convicted. His punishment was probation, community service, and a fine. He never served time in prison. Eventually, the case faded into the background. Harold rebuilt his life. He met Lucy. He moved to England. and almost no one around him knew about the violent history he had left behind in Louisiana. For years, that past remained buried, until history began repeating itself. By 2009, nearly a decade after their relationship began, Harold and Lucy's marriage had completely fallen apart. Lucy had reached a decision. She wanted out. She had reconnected with an old school friend through Facebook. Their friendship slowly became a new relationship. For Lucy, it represented hope, a chance to start over, a chance to build a life free from constant arguments and emotional pressure. She wanted a divorce. For Harold, it was a betrayal he simply could not accept. For Harold Landry, the divorce wasn't simply the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of the life he had spent years building. He had left behind his business, his home in Louisiana, and everything familiar to start over with Lucy. In his mind, she wasn't just his wife. She had become his entire identity. Friends later told investigators that Harold was devastated by the separation. He struggled to accept that Lucy no longer wanted to be with him. But it wasn't only the emotional loss that consumed him. It was the financial one. According to witnesses, Harold repeatedly said he didn't want Lucy to benefit from the divorce. He changed his will and began making decisions designed to ensure she would receive as little as possible if the marriage ended. By August 2009, the separation was officially underway. Although they had decided to divorce, they continued living under the same roof. The house was divided. Separate bedrooms, separate lives. Every day became another reminder that their marriage was over. Meanwhile, both had started seeing other people. Lucy had begun a relationship with an old school friend. Harold was seeing another woman who lived nearby. The legal battle quickly turned bitter. Every discussion became an argument. Money, property, furniture, the family home. Nothing was too small to fight over. At one point, Lucy asked Harold for financial assistance so she could rent an apartment and move out with the children. Harold agreed. But when he later discovered that Lucy had used part of that money to hire an experienced divorce lawyer, his anger intensified. According to prosecutors, Harold became increasingly determined to prevent Lucy from walking away with anything he believed belonged to him. The negotiations grew more hostile with each passing week. Inside the house, the atmosphere became unbearable. Every conversation carried tension. Every encounter risked becoming another confrontation. Neither of them realized that they were only days away from the final argument. An argument that would end in unimaginable violence. Monday, February 1, 2010. The day began like so many others inside the Landry home. Cold, quiet, and filled with tension. For months, Harold and Lucy had been living separate lives under the same roof. Every conversation seemed to end in another argument. Every room in the house carried the weight of a marriage that was already over. That evening, Lucy opened Facebook. She typed 7 words that would later be seen by millions of people around the world. "I've never hated someone as much as I hate someone now." She clicked post. Less than an hour later, the final confrontation began. According to court evidence and Harold's own testimony, the argument started inside the house. Like so many arguments before it, it centered on the divorce. Who would keep the furniture? Who would receive what? Who would leave with the better settlement? The discussion quickly turned into another bitter fight. At some point, the argument moved into Lucy's bedroom. Harold reached for her mobile phone. The confrontation then spilled into the kitchen. This was where Harold's version of events began. He claimed that Lucy pushed him. He claimed he stumbled into a baker's rack. He claimed he grabbed the nearest object he could find, a heavy granite rolling pin. According to Harold, he threw it at Lucy in panic, striking her in the head. He also claimed that Lucy had picked up a knife first and threatened him. His lawyers would later argue that he acted in self-defense, or at the very least, under extreme provocation. But investigators believed the physical evidence told a completely different story. The judge would later describe Harold's account as a story created after the fact. Because what happened next wasn't self-defense. It wasn't panic. It was pursuit. Bleeding heavily from the blow to her head, Lucy fled the house. She ran into the freezing darkness, desperately trying to escape. She headed toward a neighbor's home. She screamed for help. She pounded on windows. She begged someone to open the door. Neighbors heard her cries echo across the estate. One witness rushed outside. But before anyone could reach her, Harold caught up with her. There, in the darkness outside the family home, he attacked Lucy with a knife. Again, and again, and again. By the time the assault ended, Lucy had suffered 23 stab wounds. Many of those injuries, the court later heard, were inflicted while she was already lying on the ground. She had raised her arms in a desperate attempt to protect herself. She never had a chance. When emergency crews arrived, a large butcher's knife was still lodged in her body. Lucy was rushed to Worcestershire Royal Hospital. Despite every effort by doctors, she could not be saved. She was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Inside the house, 7-year-old Harriet and 14-year-old James had slept through nearly the entire attack. They had no idea their mother was dying just outside the front of their home. At 11:45 p.m. on February 1, 2010, officers from West Mercia Police were dispatched to the Landry residence. The scene they encountered was devastating. Outside the family home lay the body of Lucy Davies, surrounded by bloodstains and clear signs of a violent struggle. Inside, 2 children remained unaware of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Harold Landry, however, was nowhere to be found. But he hadn't gone far. Before disappearing into the night, Harold made one unexpected stop. He drove to the cottage of another woman he had been seeing during the separation. When she answered the door, Harold calmly told her that something terrible had happened. Then, without offering any real explanation, he handed her 3 banker's drafts worth £30,000, a bundle of cash, his car keys, and several signed blank checks. He turned around and walked away into the darkness. A short time later, a police sergeant found Harold walking alone along a quiet country road. He offered no resistance. Officers later described him as calm, quiet, and remarkably composed. Just days later, on February 4, 2010, Harold Landry was formally charged with the murder of Lucy Davies. For nearly a year, prosecutors carefully built their case. Every witness statement, every forensic report, every piece of physical evidence, all pointed toward the same conclusion. This was not an act of self-defense. It was murder. The trial finally began in February 2011 at Wolverhampton Crown Court. Over 7 days, jurors listened as prosecutors reconstructed the final hours of Lucy's life. They presented evidence showing that Harold had changed his will before the killing. Witnesses testified that he had repeatedly said he didn't want Lucy to receive his money after the divorce. The prosecution argued that Harold wasn't simply losing a marriage, he was losing control. One of the most powerful moments of the trial came when prosecutors used a detailed courtroom animation to recreate the attack. Instead of asking jurors to imagine the sequence of events, they watched it unfold step by step. The animation showed Lucy fleeing the house, running toward safety, Harold chasing after her, and the brutal attack that followed outside. The physical evidence spoke louder than words. Lucy hadn't attacked Harold. She had been trying to escape him. The defense did not deny that Harold had killed his wife. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. Instead, his lawyers argued that he should be convicted of manslaughter, not murder. They claimed months of humiliation, emotional stress, and Lucy's alleged actions had caused Harold to lose control. Harold himself took the witness stand. He cried. He told the jury that he had loved Lucy. He claimed he couldn't remember the stabbing itself, and once again, he insisted that Lucy had threatened him first. But the prosecution argued something very different. People acting in genuine self-defense don't chase an injured victim into the darkness. They don't continue attacking someone who is already on the ground. And they certainly don't inflict 23 stab wounds. The evidence simply didn't support Harold's version of events. After hearing 7 days of testimony and reviewing all of the evidence, the fate of Harold Landry rested in the hands of the jury. They didn't deliberate for days. They didn't spend weeks debating the facts. After just 3 hours and 52 minutes, the jury returned with its decision: guilty of murder. The courtroom fell silent. Harold Landry showed little emotion as the verdict was read. Then, immediately after the conviction, the jury learned something they had never heard during the trial. 16 years earlier, Harold had already been convicted in Louisiana after shooting a man in the neck during a confrontation. The judge had deliberately kept that information from the jury until after the verdict to ensure the trial remained fair and unbiased. But once the guilty verdict had been delivered, Harold's violent past could finally be revealed. It painted a disturbing picture. This wasn't an isolated act. It was a pattern. On February 25, 2011, Mr. Justice Foskett sentenced Harold Landry to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before he could even be considered for parole. During sentencing, the judge's words echoed throughout the courtroom. He described the attack on Lucy as unspeakable and unforgivable. He said the evidence left no doubt that Harold intended to kill his wife. Then he addressed Harold directly. "There is a trait within you that, when challenged or provoked, can lead to serious violence." Those words summarized the entire case, not just the murder, but the man behind it. For years, Harold had built an image of success. A millionaire, a respected businessman, a devoted husband. But beneath that carefully constructed image was someone who couldn't accept rejection, someone who couldn't accept losing control. And when Lucy finally chose freedom, he made sure neither of them would ever have the future she had hoped for. Lucy Davies was only 39 years old. She was remembered by friends and family as a loving mother, a gifted musician, and a woman who simply wanted to begin a new chapter of her life. Instead, her story became another heartbreaking reminder of how dangerous the final stages of a controlling relationship can become. Her children lost their mother, her family lost a daughter, and an entire community was left asking the same question. Could this tragedy have been prevented? Because sometimes, the greatest danger doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from the person who once promised to love you for. Technical and psychological analysis. Before this case came to trial, Harold Landry's defense relied on one central argument. He wasn't denying that he killed Lucy. Instead, he claimed that he had simply lost control. His lawyers argued that months of emotional pressure, constant arguments, and Lucy's alleged provocation pushed him beyond his breaking point. According to Harold, Lucy had threatened him with a knife, and everything that followed happened in a blind panic. But the physical evidence told a very different story. The first major problem with Harold's account was the sequence of events. If someone truly acts in self-defense, the violence usually ends once the immediate threat has passed. That didn't happen here. Lucy didn't continue attacking Harold. She ran away. She escaped the house. She crossed the driveway. She screamed for help. She banged on neighbors' windows. She desperately tried to survive. Harold made a choice. He followed her. The attack continued outside the house, long after any claim of immediate danger had disappeared. For investigators, that single fact destroyed the self-defense argument. The number of injuries also mattered. Lucy suffered 23 stab wounds. Several of those wounds were inflicted while she was already on the ground, trying to shield herself with her arms. This wasn't a brief struggle. It was a sustained and determined attack. Prosecutors also focused on Harold's behavior after the murder. Instead of immediately calling emergency services or attempting to save Lucy's life, he drove to another woman's house. He handed over £30,000 in banker's drafts, cash, signed blank checks, and the keys to his car. Only afterward did he walk away until police found him. To prosecutors, those actions suggested that Harold fully understood what had happened and was already thinking about the consequences. His actions appeared calm, organized, deliberate, not the behavior of someone acting in uncontrollable panic. Psychologically, Harold displayed several behavioral patterns commonly discussed in domestic homicide research. Throughout his life, he consistently portrayed himself as the victim. After shooting Chris Price in Louisiana, he claimed self-defense. After killing Lucy, he again insisted that she had attacked him first. Even while admitting responsibility, he rarely accepted personal blame. Instead, responsibility was placed on someone else. Another significant factor was control. Harold was 25 years older than Lucy. He provided the home, the financial security, the lifestyle. Over time, that financial imbalance gave him enormous influence within the relationship. When Lucy decided to leave, Harold didn't simply lose a wife. He lost the control he had built his identity around. Research into domestic violence has repeatedly shown that the period immediately following separation is often the most dangerous. When a controlling partner realizes that the relationship is ending, violence can escalate dramatically. The final months of Harold and Lucy's marriage closely followed that pattern. Separate bedrooms, financial disputes, arguments over property, new relationships, and finally, a violent confrontation that ended in murder. Whether Harold genuinely forgot parts of the attack, as he claimed during the trial, can never be known with certainty. But the jury didn't believe his version of events. Neither did the judge. The evidence showed planning, pursuit, persistence, and ultimately, intent. In the end, this case wasn't simply about one violent night. It was about years of control, resentment, and an inability to accept rejection. For Harold Landry, losing the marriage became something he could not live with. For Lucy Davies, trying to leave cost her life. And that is what makes this case one of the most disturbing examples of domestic homicide in modern British criminal. Long after the trial ended, long after the headlines disappeared, the people who knew Lucy never remembered her as a victim first. They remembered her smile, her kindness, her love of music, her devotion to her children. Friends described her as intelligent, compassionate, and full of energy. She had an extraordinary knowledge of classical music and a gift for making people feel welcome. Those closest to her said she always tried to see the best in others, even during the most difficult moments of her life. But behind closed doors, her marriage had become something very different from the life she had once imagined. By the time she decided to leave, Lucy wasn't asking for revenge. She wasn't asking for wealth. She wasn't asking to destroy Harold. She wanted something much simpler: her freedom. She wanted a safe home for her children. She wanted a chance to start over. She never got that chance. Cases like this continue to be studied because they reveal a pattern seen in many domestic homicide investigations. The most dangerous moment in an abusive or controlling relationship is often not when the couple is together. It's when one person decides to leave. The loss of control can trigger anger, desperation, and violence in someone who refuses to accept rejection. That doesn't mean every difficult relationship ends this way. Far from it. But it reminds us why threats, coercive control, stalking, and escalating violence should never be ignored. These warning signs matter. Sometimes, they are the only warning a victim ever gets. More than a decade has passed since that cold February night in Worcestershire. The mansion where the family once lived is now just another house. The court proceedings are over. The appeals have ended. The newspapers have moved on, but for Lucy's children, family, and friends, time did not erase what happened. It simply taught them how to live with it. Harold Landry lost his freedom inside a prison cell. Lucy Davies lost something far greater. She lost the future she was fighting to build. And perhaps that is the most heartbreaking part of this entire case. She survived the arguments. She survived months of emotional turmoil. She even survived long enough to run from her attacker and desperately seek help. But she couldn't outrun the person who refused to let her go. This wasn't a crime driven by love. It was a crime driven by control. And that is why the story of Harold Landry and Lucy Davies continues to be remembered today. Not because of the wealth, not because of the courtroom, but because one woman's search for freedom ended in unimaginable tragedy. Some true crime cases fade with time. Others become permanent reminders of how dangerous control, obsession, and unchecked anger can become. The murder of Lucy Davies is one of those cases. Harold Landry had spent his entire life building success. He built a fortune. He built a reputation. He built what appeared to be the perfect family. But when the one person he believed defined that life chose to leave, everything he had built collapsed. In the end, it wasn't money that mattered. It wasn't the mansion. It wasn't the expensive lifestyle. It was one man's refusal to accept the word no. The evidence presented in court left little room for doubt. Lucy wasn't killed during a sudden argument. She was attacked as she tried to escape. She ran toward safety. She cried out for help. She fought to survive, and she never stopped trying to live. Today, Lucy Davies is remembered not for the way she died, but for the life she lived. A loving mother, a talented musician, a daughter, a friend. A woman who deserved the opportunity to begin again. Harold Landry's name will forever be associated with one of Britain's most disturbing domestic homicide cases. Lucy's name deserves to be remembered for something far greater. Her courage, her determination, and her desperate fight for freedom. If this case teaches us anything, it's this: violence rarely begins with murder. It often begins with control, with manipulation, with isolation, with the belief that another human being can somehow be owned. The moment that control is challenged, the danger can become unimaginable. Thank you for watching. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime stories from around the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never ignore the warning signs that others may be too afraid to see.